The compound room smelled of wintergreen and iron sulfate, and the particular burnt sugar note of a bonding suppressant that had been stored too close to heat. Neve Ashford stood at the long stone counter with her sleeves pushed to her elbows and her nose 3 inches from a vial that should not have existed in the royal stores. She tilted it. The liquid caught the light wrong. Too thick. The viscosity of a compound that had been cut with something cheaper, and not particularly well. She set it aside and made a note in the ledger. 3rd one this shipment. The northern suppliers were either getting lazy or getting bold, and either way, someone was going to end up with a bonding suppressant that did half of what it promised and twice what it shouldn't. This was her work. The Alpha King's compound room, the most comprehensive chemical library in the 4 territories, and she was the woman who kept it honest. Every suppressant, every healing tincture, every scent-masking agent that passed through the court's stores came through her hands first. Her nose was more precise than any instrument the healers had built. And more importantly, it didn't lie. She had been here for 3 years. She had been Hadion Voss's fated mate for 8 months. These 2 facts occupied entirely different shelves in her mind, and she preferred to keep them there. She finished the analysis on the last vial, recorded the results, sealed the contaminated batch for disposal, and checked the time. The diplomatic reception started in an hour. Hadion had told her to attend, which was unusual enough to notice. He generally preferred her elsewhere during political events. Her presence complicated the careful image he was building among the court's upper ranks, the image of a man unencumbered by a bond he hadn't chosen and couldn't politically afford. She understood this. She had been understanding it for 8 months with a discipline that she was quietly, increasingly, furious about. She cleaned her workspace, arranged the remaining vials by reactivity, locked the compound room with the key she wore on a chain beneath her shirt, against her sternum, where it sat warm from her skin all day. She changed in the small side room where she kept a clean dress for occasions exactly like this. Dark fabric, practical cut, nothing that drew attention. She checked her reflection in the polished copper panel beside the door. Dark, curly hair, with warm brown highlights she'd inherited from her mother. Blue-green eyes that her mother had called sea glass and her father had called nothing because he'd been dead since she was 4. Freckles across the nose and cheeks that no amount of court formality had managed to fade. She looked like what she was. A compound specialist, competent, unremarkable by the court's standards of beauty. The kind of woman a man like Hadion Voss might keep in a back room and never mention in the front ones. She left the compound room and took the eastern corridor toward the Great Hall. It was the faster route and the emptier one, which was why she preferred it and why the sound of voices stopped her 20 paces from the alcove near the servant's stair. Hadion's voice. She knew it the way her body knew its own pulse. Low, controlled, the particular cadence he used with his inner circle when he was being honest rather than political. And with it, 2 others. Breck and Talon, his seconds. She should have kept walking. She knew this the way she knew a contaminated compound by its first top note. The knowledge arrived before the decision, and the decision she made was the wrong one. She stopped. The words came through the stone clearly, carried by the corridor's acoustics and the fact that Hadion was not bothering to lower his voice. Why would he? She was in the compound room. She was always in the compound room. Breck's question first. So the Vander Alliance, that's confirmed? Hadion's answer, easy and assured. Negotiations close after the summit. Sylvie Vander's father wants the formal arrangement announced before midsummer. It's a strong match. Politically, it changes everything for us. Then Talon. Careful. The way Talon was always careful. And the compound girl? Your bond situation? The pause was barely a breath. Long enough for Neve's wolf to go very still in her chest. Long enough for the corridor to feel suddenly airless. She's temporary. You know that. Once the Vander Alliance is locked, I'll handle it. She's useful for now. Her compound work gives me access I need. But she's not. He paused again. And the pause was worse than the words, because in it lived the specific sound of a man choosing his phrasing the way he might choose which shirt to discard. She's not permanent. Laughter. Low and knowing. The particular laughter of men who understood an arrangement and found it reasonable. Neve stood in the corridor. She did not move. She did not breathe in a way that would carry sound. She processed the information with the same precision she applied to every compound that passed through her hands. The top notes were casual cruelty, the ease of a man discussing logistics. The mid-notes carried political calculation, the Vander name deployed as currency. And the base notes, the ones that told the truest story, said that he had never intended to keep her. She was a compound with a use case and an expiration date, and he had been measuring both from the beginning. Her wolf made a sound inside her chest. Not a howl, not a whine, something lower and more fundamental. The sound of a creature encountering a wound it did not have a name for. She turned and walked toward the reception hall, not away from it. She had work to do. She had always had work to do. That, at least, was not temporary. The great hall of the Alpha King's court had been dressed for diplomacy. Banners from 4 territories hung in the vaulted space. Candles multiplied themselves in the polished stone floors. The scent landscape was dense and layered, and Neve read it without conscious effort as she entered, the way a cartographer reads terrain. Stress signatures from the King's Advisory Council, the sharp green note of territorial anxiety from the Eastern delegation, 2 concealed compounds on attendees near the Western Wall. One was a standard scent-masking agent, low quality. The other was medicinal and personal and none of her business. She cataloged both and moved on. She took a position near the far wall where the compound room staff were expected to be available but not visible. She picked up a glass of water and held it, because holding something made standing alone in a crowded room look intentional rather than imposed. Marin found her within 3 minutes. The court healer was older, sharp-boned, with the kind of face that had decided long ago to stop performing pleasantness and now simply said what it meant. "You look like you've swallowed glass." "I'm fine," Neve said. "You are never fine when you say you're fine." Marin studied her with the professional attention she gave everything. "What happened?" "Nothing happened." Neve took a sip of water. "I am attending a reception." "Attending is happening." Marin's mouth pressed flat. She did not push. She had known Neve long enough to understand that pushing produced silence rather than confession. She simply stood beside her, which was its own form of kindness, and which Neve did not have the capacity to acknowledge right now without something cracking. The main doors opened. The room's attention shifted with the involuntary unity of something pulled by a current. Neve felt it before she identified it. A change in the air pressure, a deepening of the scent landscape. Alpha presence, but not the sharp, calculated variety she had learned to associate with Hadion's command staff. This was something older and more settled, the kind of authority that existed as a constant rather than a performance. Brennan Thane walked into the reception hall with 3 wolves at his back. She had heard of him, Alpha of the Ashen Moor territory, the northern borderlands that the court considered strategically important and socially irrelevant. His delegation was smaller than any other in the room, and he did not appear to have noticed or to care. He was tall and broad in a way that had nothing to do with court tailoring and everything to do with actual use. Dark brown hair pulled into a loose half bun with strands falling around his face, a short trimmed beard over a jawline that looked carved from the same granite as his territory, bronzed skin that said he spent his days outside rather than in council chambers. He wore a dark linen shirt with a deep lace neckline, rough textured fabric, a worn leather strap across the chest. He looked like a man who had dressed for function and arrived at formidability by accident. His eyes moved across the room with the unhurried assessment of someone who had already decided he was the most dangerous thing in it and was now checking whether anything disagreed. Neve watched the room respond. Spines straightening, gazes dropping. The involuntary choreography of wolves encountering authority they could not outrank. Hadion's dominance in a room felt like a blade held at a precise angle. Brennan Thane's presence felt like the ground itself, something beneath you that you only noticed when it shifted. His gaze crossed hers, brief. She was standing against the far wall, holding a glass of water, wearing a dark dress designed not to be seen. There was no reason for him to notice her. He scented the air once. The motion was subtle, a slight lift of the chin, an expansion of the chest. His expression did not change. But something in his posture shifted, a fractional reorientation, as if a compass needle had adjusted by a single degree. She filed it under professional curiosity. Alpha's scented rooms. It was what they did. It meant nothing specific. She filed it and moved on. Hadeon found her 10 minutes later. His hand settled on her arm with the calibrated pressure of public performance. His grip was correct. His positioning was correct. His scent was controlled, as it always was, flattened into the neutral register he maintained around other wolves. And beneath the control, as always, the suppressant. She had identified it in their second week together. A bond-dampening compound, pharmaceutical grade, administered daily. She had cataloged it the way she cataloged everything, clinically, precisely, and filed it under his personal business. His body. His choice. She had told herself this with the same professional detachment she applied to every compound she analyzed, and she had almost believed it. Tonight, for the first time, she let herself name what it actually was. He had been chemically dampening the fated bond between them for 8 months, flattening his wolf's response to her so that her proximity did not interfere with his composure, his plans, his careful political architecture. She was not just temporary in his words. She was temporary in his bloodstream. He had made a pharmacological decision to keep her at a distance that biology had never intended. She removed her arm from his grip. The motion was small, not dramatic. She simply lifted his fingers from her sleeve the way she would remove a contaminated sample from a clean counter. Hadeon frowned. The expression was brief and quickly controlled. She was already walking away. Across the hall, toward the balcony doors, through the crowd that did not part for her because she was not the kind of woman crowds parted for, she moved through the gaps between people the way water moves through stone, finding the spaces that already existed. She did not look back. The cold air hit her face and she breathed it in. The balcony overlooked the inner courtyard, and the night sky above the castle walls was clear enough to show the tree line on the northern ridge. She placed her hands flat on the stone railing and stood there. She was not going to cry. She was going to do what she always did. She was going to think. Her savings would sustain her for 3 months if she was careful. Her compound skills were in demand in every territory. She did not need Hadeon's court. She did not need the back room he had given her, or the professional access that came with his name attached to hers like a leash she had been pretending was a gift. She needed to leave. The calculation was simple. The execution would be less so, but she had managed worse. The balcony door opened behind her. Brennan Thane stepped outside with the ease of a man who had been heading for the railing before he knew anyone was already there. He glanced at her, registered her presence, and leaned against the stone 3 feet to her left. He did not look at her directly. "The wind's from the north," he said. His voice was lower than she'd expected. Rougher. Not unpleasant. "There will be a frost tonight." Neve said nothing for a moment. She was still running calculations. Where to go? What to take? How many days before the bond separation symptoms became unmanageable? "You're the Ashenmore Alpha," she said. Not a question. "And you're the compound specialist." He said it the way someone might say, "You're the structural engineer." Professional recognition without the qualifier she was used to hearing. Not Hadeon's compound specialist. Not the compound girl. Just the role, clean and unattached. She looked at him. He was watching the tree line with the settled attention of someone who looked at landscapes habitually, who lived in them rather than around them. "Your northern trade route compounds," she said. "The batch that came through court analysis last month, the wintergreen base was degraded. Whoever's supplying your territory is cutting corners or worse." Brennan turned his head and looked at her fully for the first time. The assessment in his expression was not the political measurement she was accustomed to. It was the look of a man encountering competence and deciding how much weight to give it. "Worse," he said. "We lost an entire season of healing stores to contamination. My territories needed a compound specialist for months. The work's piling up." The information landed with a specificity that felt almost structural, as if a bridge she hadn't known she was building had just found its opposite bank. The balcony door opened again. Hadeon stood in the doorway. He was backlit by the reception hall's warmth, his jet-black hair precise, his angular features set in the expression he wore when something was not going according to plan. His dark eyes moved from Neve to Brennan and back, calculating. His scent spiked. She caught it instantly. Beneath the suppressant's flattening effect, beneath the controlled neutrality he maintained in public, his wolf had surged, possessive, territorial. The involuntary response of a bonded wolf, sensing a rival alpha in proximity to his mate. He didn't know he was doing it. The suppressant dulled his self-awareness of the bond enough that the spike registered to him as simple irritation rather than what it actually was. But Neve's nose didn't lie, and she read the compound interaction in real time. The suppressant struggling to contain a biological response that was never meant to be contained. Neve. His voice had an edge she hadn't heard before, sharper than the corridor, less controlled. She looked at Hadion. She looked at the man who had called her temporary with the casual confidence of someone describing the weather. She looked at his sharp jaw and his dark, cold eyes and the immaculate high collar of his coat with its silver buckle detailing everything about him designed to communicate control and authority and the absolute certainty that his decisions were correct. She turned to Brennan. "You mentioned your territory needs a compound specialist," she said. Brennan met her eyes. His expression was steady. "No surprise. No performance." "I did," he said. She nodded. "I'd like to discuss terms." She walked past Hadion without touching him. Her shoulder passed within inches of his chest, and his scent hit her fully. The suppressant, the wolf beneath it straining, and underneath both, the bass note she had known for 8 months. The note that said he was hers and she was his, and the bond between them was as real as gravity. She kept walking. The balcony door closed behind her. Hadion stood on the other side of it in the cold, and his wolf began a sound he had no name for and no pharmaceutical protocol to silence. She packed that night. She did not own much. 3 years in the compound room had produced more professional tools than personal possessions, and the tools fit into 2 cases that she could carry herself. She stripped the small room beside the compound room where she had slept on the nights the work ran late, which was most nights, which was every night since the bond had started pulling her toward quarters she had never been invited to share. Marin appeared in her doorway at midnight. She did not knock. She leaned against the frame and watched Neve fold a shirt with unnecessary precision. "So," Marin said. "So," Neve replied. "Ashen Moor?" "Yes." Marin was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was stripped of its usual edge. "That territory is wild, Neve. Cold. Remote. His court won't follow you there." "That," Neve said, "is the idea." Marin crossed to the workbench and picked up a dried sprig of something that had no business being in a compound room and existed solely because Marin had put it there 2 years ago, and Neve had never removed it. She turned it between her fingers. "I have known you for 3 years," Marin said. "You have reorganized the entire compound archive, identified 2 contaminated shipments that would have poisoned half the court's healing stores, and trained 3 apprentices who are now better than anyone who came before them. You have done all of this while being treated as an inconvenience by a man who does not deserve to share air with you." She set down the sprig. "I would like to say something unkind about Hadion Voss, but I think you already know everything I would say." Neve's hands stilled on the shirt. Marin crossed the room and put her arms around her. The embrace was brief and hard, and smelled of dried herbs, and the particular warmth of someone who had been heating water for tea in preparation for this conversation. "Write to me," Marin said. "Every week. If you miss a week, I will come there myself and I will bring soup and opinions and you will not enjoy either of them." Neve held on for 1 breath longer than she meant to. Then she let go and finished packing. She left before dawn. The 2 cases fit on the supply wagon heading north, and she sat beside the driver with her hands in her lap and watched the Alpha King's castle diminish behind her. It did not look smaller as it receded. It looked the same. She was the thing that was changing size. The bond pulled at her chest like a hook set beneath the sternum. Constant, specific. The particular ache of a fated bond being stretched across distance that biology had never anticipated. Her wolf keened low and continuous, a sound she felt rather than heard, and she sat with it the way she sat with every compound she could not neutralize. She observed it. She measured its intensity. She filed it under things that are real but do not get to decide. The road to Ashenmore took 2 days. Ashenmore was nothing like the court. The territory sat in a northern valley where the mountains shouldered against each other and the pines grew so dense the light came through green. The settlement was functional rather than decorative. Stone buildings with slate roofs, a forge that was clearly the social center of the compound, training grounds visible from the main road. No banners. No polished floors. The scent landscape was cleaner than the court's, less layered, more honest. Brennan Thane met her at the gate. Not a delegation, not a steward. The Alpha himself, standing in the morning cold with his sleeves rolled to his forearms and dirt under his nails that said he had been working before she arrived. "You came," he said. "I came," Neve agreed. He picked up one of her cases before she could protest and carried it toward the compound stores. He did not comment on how light it was. He did not comment on the fact that she had packed her entire life into 2 containers. He simply carried it. The compound stores were worse than reported. She stood in the stone-walled room that served as Ashenmore's chemical library and felt the professional equivalent of a gut punch. Vials incorrectly stored, healing tinctures degraded past usefulness, bonding suppressants contaminated with a secondary agent she could smell from the doorway. The previous specialist had either been incompetent or absent for considerably longer than months. She turned to Brennan. He was standing in the doorway watching her catalog the damage, and his expression held the particular flatness of a man who has known something is bad and is now watching someone confirm exactly how bad. "How long?" she asked. "Since the previous specialist left? 7 months. No." She picked up a vial and held it to the light. "How long has someone been tampering with these stores?" His expression shifted. "What do you mean? This contamination isn't neglect." She set the vial down and reached for another. "This is a degradation agent introduced deliberately into a binding compound. The pattern is too consistent for accident. Someone has been poisoning your supplies." The silence that followed was the kind that reorganized a room. Brennan looked at her, then at the stores, then back at her. "What do you need?" he asked. Not, "Are you sure?" Not, "That seems unlikely." Not, "Explain yourself." "What do you need?" She told him. Full access to every shipment record for the past year. A clean workspace with proper ventilation. Reagent supplies for compound analysis. Authorization to test anything in the stores without prior approval. He provided all of it before noon. She met Corwin, Brennan's second, within the hour. He was lean, watchful, with a dry economy of expression that said he measured everything twice and committed to nothing he hadn't verified personally. He looked at Neve the way a border guard looks at an unfamiliar passport. Thoroughly. "You're the compound specialist," Corwin said. "I am. From the King's Court. Previously." His eyes moved to Brennan, who was carrying a crate of reagent supplies through the door with the unself-conscious physicality of an alpha who did not consider manual labor beneath his rank. Corwin said nothing further. He did not need to. His scent said it clearly enough. "I am watching, and I have not decided yet." She met Petra that afternoon. The herbalist occupied a warm, cluttered workspace attached to the settlement's healing house and spoke to Neve with the blunt familiarity of a woman who had decided within the first 30 seconds that formality was a waste of both their time. "So you're the nose," Petra said. "I'm the compound specialist." "Same thing." Petra handed her a cup of something hot that smelled of ginger and pine bark. "Brennan's been saying he needed someone with your skills for months. Then again, Brennan says a lot of things and does most of them. So I suppose the saying was just the prelude." Neve took the cup. The warmth of it sank through her fingers and she held it a moment longer than necessary. Brennan gave her quarters. A stone cottage at the edge of the compound, set slightly apart from the other residences, with a garden that had gone entirely to seed. The cottage was small, clean, and functional. One room for sleeping, one for working, a hearth that drew well, the door locked from the inside with a bolt she could set herself. She negotiated terms. 6 months. Contract work. Exit clause at any time. No penalty. No obligation. She could leave when she chose. Brennan agreed to every condition without argument. He did not negotiate. He did not push for longer terms. He did not ask why a compound specialist with a fated bond to another man needed an exit clause in a professional contract. He agreed and left, and she stood in the cottage alone. She did not unpack. She set the 2 cases against the wall by the door and hung her traveling cloak on the hook and built a fire in the hearth and sat beside it in the only chair. The cottage was quiet. The settlement was quiet. The bond pulled at her chest with the constant specificity of a compass needle, pointed toward a man 2 days' ride south, who had called her temporary in a corridor and meant it. Her wolf keened. Longer this time. Deeper. The sound of something mourning, a thing that had never actually been alive. Neve sat in the chair and felt the warmth of the fire on the left side of her face and the cold of the stone wall on the right and did not cry. She called it withdrawal. That was the accurate term. The bond was biological, the separation was physical, and the symptoms, the ache at the sternum, the heightened scent sensitivity, the low constant awareness of absence, these were pharmacologically consistent with withdrawal from any chemical dependency. She was a compound specialist. She could analyze this. She could measure the intensity curve and predict the duration and manage the symptoms with the same clinical precision she applied to everything else. She did not name it grief. Grief implied something had been lost, and you cannot lose a thing you were never allowed to believe was yours. She slept that night with her bags packed and her boots by the door. The contamination pattern became clear within 3 days. Neve spread the analysis across the workbench that Brennan had cleared for her, a long stone table in the building adjacent to the compound stores, and traced the degradation agent through 17 separate batches over 7 months. The agent was sophisticated. It worked by accelerating the natural breakdown of active compounds, producing results that looked like poor storage rather than deliberate interference. A less precise nose would have attributed the damage to neglect. Neve's nose did not make that kind of error. She reported her findings to Brennan and Corwin in the meeting room above the forge. She laid out the evidence without embellishment. The specific agent, the consistent delivery vector, the timeline that matched Ashenmore's supply contracts with a particular network of traders. When she finished, Brennan was quiet for a moment that she was learning to recognize as the space where he organized his response before delivering it. "Can you identify the supplier?" he asked. "Given access to the contract records and 1 more week of analysis?" "Yes," Neve said. He nodded once. "Corwin, get her the records." Corwin moved immediately. No hesitation, no questioning of the order or the woman who had generated it. They worked. The days developed a rhythm that Neve had not anticipated and did not fully trust. She analyzed compounds in the mornings. She reviewed supply records in the afternoons. She ate meals in the communal hall because Petra informed her flatly that eating alone in a stone cottage was not a dietary strategy, it was a statement of intent, and the intent in question was depressing. She noticed things about Brennan. She tried not to. She failed. He moved through his own territory differently than any alpha she had observed at court. There was no performance in it, no calculated display of authority. He trained with his wolves in the mornings, and his form was practical rather than showy. He made decisions quickly, but not carelessly. When one of his younger wolves challenged a training exercise ruling, Brennan listened to the full objection before responding, and his response addressed the substance rather than the insubordination. His wolves responded to him with an ease that had nothing to do with fear. They deferred not because his alpha presence compelled it, but because they trusted the judgment beneath it. The difference was subtle and total. She noticed how he spoke to her, or more precisely, how he did not speak to her. He did not ask about Hadeon. He did not comment on the bond she carried. He did not attempt to fill the professional space between them with personal inquiry. He came to the compound workspace when he had questions about the investigation. He brought her tea without being asked. The specific blend of ginger and something sharper that she had mentioned once to Petra settled her stomach when she'd been working with volatile compounds. He asked her opinion in territory councils, publicly, in front of his wolves. The first time he did this, she was so startled she answered the question before she'd finished being startled. "You have a better read on this than anyone in the room," Brennan had said. Matter of fact, unremarkable, as if the alpha of Ashenmore deferring to a packless compound specialist on a security matter in front of his entire command staff was a thing that simply happened. Corwin's expression had not changed. which told Neve it was not the first time Brennan had done this, and it would not be the last. She unpacked one bag. Not both. One. She put her shirts in the small chest beside the bed, and her professional tools on the workbench, and her spare boots under the window. The second bag stayed packed by the door. 5 weeks into her time at Ashenmore, on a late evening when the compound workspace smelled of reactive agents and the particular mineral note of Ashenmore's well water, Petra came through the door with a fresh bundle of dried herbs and a story about the settlement's baker that involved a misidentified rising agent and 12 loaves of bread that had achieved structural integrity beyond any reasonable expectation. Neve laughed. It happened before she tracked it. A real laugh, surprised out of her by the image of 12 brick-like loaves being used as doorstops across the settlement. The sound came out rough and unfamiliar, as if the machinery that produced it had not been serviced in some time. Brennan was in the doorway. She did not know when he had arrived. He was leaning against the frame with a supply report in one hand, and his eyes were on her face with an expression she could not immediately classify. His scent shifted, brief, controlled. He corrected it almost instantly, pulling the emotional signature back behind the neutral baseline he maintained in professional settings. But Neve was a scent reader, and almost instantly was not instantly. And in the gap between the shift and the correction, she read what was there. Warmth, want, and something held deliberately still, the way a man holds a flame he is shielding from wind. He wanted her. He was attracted to her, and he was choosing, actively, with ongoing effort, not to act on it. She cataloged this the way she cataloged compounds. She noted the top notes, the base notes, the interaction pattern. She filed it, and she thought about it later, in the cottage, in the dark, with her wolf quiet for once and the fire burned low. Hadion's attraction to her had been a thing he used, a tool of proximity that he deployed when he needed access, or calm, or the specific biological benefit of having his fated mate nearby. He had managed it the way he managed his compounds, mediating the dose, controlling the response. Brennan's attraction was a thing he carried, privately, without expectation, without condition. He did not use it as leverage. He did not shape it into a demand. He held it the way he held everything else, steadily, with his hands open and the option of refusal always visible. This undid her. Not because it was grand or dramatic, but because it was the opposite. It was the smallest, most ordinary form of respect she had ever encountered, and it hurt in a way that told her how unaccustomed she had become to being respected at all. She dreamed of Hadion that night, his scent, the sharp, precise architecture of his face, his hands, which were elegant and cold and had touched her with the competence of a man completing a necessary task. In the dream, the bond pulled, and she followed it down a corridor that never ended, toward a door that never opened, and behind the door was the word temporary carved into the stone. She woke furious. At him, at her wolf, at the immutable biological fact that the bond was still there, still pulling, still insisting that the man who had called her disposable was the man her body believed she was made for. She went to the compound workspace before dawn and began testing reagents with a focus that bordered on violence. She unpacked the second bag that afternoon. She put the remaining clothes in the chest, placed her mother's ring on the windowsill where it could catch the morning light, and set the empty case flat under the bed. It was the first time in 8 months she had nothing packed and ready by the door. A letter arrived from Marin the following week. Neve sat on the bench outside the compound workspace and read it in the thin autumn light. Marin's handwriting was precise and slightly aggressive, and her tone carried the particular restraint of someone choosing words carefully. Hadion was different since she left. Shorter temper, inability to focus in council sessions, his wolf surfacing at inappropriate moments, eyes flashing gold during routine meetings, scent control slipping. His inner circle had noticed. The court had noticed. He was not managing it well. Marin did not editorialize. She did not say he deserves it or come back. She simply laid out the observations with clinical accuracy and ended with, "I thought you should know." Neve folded the letter and put it in her pocket and sat for a long time looking at the mountains. She knew what was happening. Bond sickness from a denied fated bond. His wolf, no longer mediated by Neve's proximity, was destabilizing. The suppressants he'd been taking would dull the symptoms but could not address the cause, and over time the gap between suppressed and actual would widen until the control failed entirely. This was verse biology, absolute and indifferent to the feelings of the parties involved. She put the letter away and went back to work. The sabotage trail was narrowing. She had traced the degradation agent to a specific formulation only available from 3 suppliers, and of those 3, only one had contracts with Ashenmoor's trade network. The connection she was approaching was one she did not want to find, but her nose did not lie, and the compound evidence did not care about her preferences. 2 days later, she confirmed it. The supplier was a subsidiary of the Vander trading network. The same Vander family whose daughter, Sylvie, was the political match Hadion had been building toward, the same alliance he had been constructing with Neve's usefulness as one of its scaffolds and her disposal as one of its planned outcomes. The sabotage of Ashenmoor's stores was not random. It was strategic. Weaken the territory's medical and defensive capacity ahead of the summit negotiations, reduce Brennan's bargaining position, create dependency on supply networks the Vander alliance controlled. And the compound used, the specific degradation agent, belonged to the same chemical family as the bond suppression compound Hadion had been taking for 8 months. Same supplier, same formulation base, 2 operations, 1 source. She sat with this for a very long time. Then she went to Brennan's study and told him everything. He listened without interrupting. He sat behind the heavy oak desk that was too small for him and too cluttered to be decorative, and he let her lay out every thread of the analysis. The Vander connection, the supply chain overlap, the timeline, and the part that made her voice go flat and careful. The bond suppression compounds Hadion had been using were sourced from the same network that was poisoning Ashenmoor's stores. When she finished, the silence in the study held the quality of something being reorganized beneath the surface. "How certain are you?" Brennan asked. Neve looked at him. "I am a compound specialist," she said. "I don't present uncertain findings." His mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something nearer to recognition. He stood from the desk. He was very tall. She noticed this freshly, the way the study seemed to adjust its proportions around him. He moved to the window and looked out at his territory for a long moment. "Can you document this for the summit?" he asked. "Every detail, every compound. Evidence that would hold before the King's Council." "Yes." "Then do it." He turned back to her. "Whatever you need." "Name it?" She named it. He provided it. That evening, as she was leaving the study, a messenger arrived on a lathered horse. Neve recognized the seal on the letter before Brennan broke it. The Alpha King's crest. Brennan read it. His expression tightened. He looked at Neve. "Hadion Voss?" he said. "He has petitioned the king to order your return to court. He is invoking the fated bond." The words landed in the space between them and stayed there. Neve stood very still. She had expected this. She had run the calculation weeks ago, the point at which Hadion's deterioration would overcome his pride and he would resort to formal channels. She had simply hoped for more time. Brennan crossed to her and held out the letter. She took it and read it. The language was formal, legal, cold. A petition citing the documented fated bond and requesting the king's intervention to compel her return. Hadion's signature at the bottom, precise and controlled. She looked for any personal address, any acknowledgement of her as a person rather than a biological asset. There was none. "This is your decision," Brennan said. His voice was careful, stripped of any inflection that might weight the choice in either direction. "I won't fight it and I won't obstruct it. Whatever you choose, the cottage and the position are yours regardless." She looked up at him. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you let me go without a fight? Because you spent 8 months with a man who decided for you." His eyes held hers. "I will not be the second one." She stood there, in his study, holding the letter, and something in the foundation of the wall she had built around herself shifted, not cracked, not collapsed, shifted, the way a structure shifts when it encounters a force it was not designed to withstand. She wrote her refusal that night, formal, brief, addressed to the King's Council with a copy to Hadion directly. She cited her professional contract with Ashenmore, her ongoing investigation into supply chain tampering, and the absence of any completed claiming that would give the petitioner legal standing. She signed it with her full name. She sealed it with the compound room's wax, which was the only seal she had ever claimed as her own. Then she sat in the cottage with the fire burning and the letter sealed on the table and the bond pulling at her chest like a tide that refused to learn the shape of the new shore. Hadion was closer. She felt it through the bond with the precision her wolf applied to all spatial information, not 2 days' ride south. Closer, moving. He was coming himself. He arrived on the 3rd morning after the letter. Neve was in the compound workspace testing a reagent series when the settlement's perimeter wolves shifted formation. She felt it through the quality of the air before anyone spoke. A change in the territorial scent landscape, the particular tension that arrived when an outside alpha crossed into claimed space. She set down the vial she was holding. Her hands were steady. The rest of her was not. Brennan met Hadion at the gate. Neve did not go to the gate. She stayed in the workspace and continued her analysis and listened to her wolf keen, with a sound that was half recognition and half something she refused to name. The bond pulled hard enough that she pressed her palm flat against the counter to anchor herself. She heard the footsteps 20 minutes later. 2 sets. Brennan's, which she knew by rhythm, and Hadion's, which she knew by the way her blood responded to them. The door opened. Brennan entered first. His expression was neutral in the specific way she had learned meant he was containing something. Behind him, Hadion. She looked at him and the compound specialist in her cataloged the damage before the woman in her could react. He looked wrong. The sharp, aristocratic control that had defined him for every day of the 8 months she'd known him was fraying at every edge. His skin was paler than its natural cool tone, almost translucent at the temples where the veins showed through. His jet-black hair was still swept back, but without the precision she associated with him, as if the hand that arranged it had been shaking. The angular cheekbones were sharper, the flesh beneath them diminished. His dark eyes, which had always held the quality of something calculated and certain, were bright in a way that had nothing to do with intelligence. His wolf was too close to the surface. She could see it in the way his gaze moved, tracking micro-movements in the room with the involuntary attention of a predator whose higher functions were losing authority over its instincts. His scent hit her fully and she stopped breathing. The suppressant was clearing. Not cleared, but clearing. The flat, pharmaceutical layer that had dampened his bond response for 8 months was thinning, and beneath it, the full architecture of his scent was surfacing for the first time in her experience. She smelled him. The actual him. Pine resin and cold stone, and something dark and layered that she had only ever caught in fragments. His wolf's scent signature, no longer medicated into silence, was broadcasting at a volume that made every hair on her arms stand. And woven through all of it, the bond. She had known it was there. She had always known it was there. But the suppressant had reduced it to a background hum, a thing she could file and manage. Now, with the chemical barrier eroding, the bond's scent signature was present in his every exhalation, with a specificity that drove the air from her lungs. This is yours. This belongs to you. This has always belonged to you. His wolf went still the moment he saw her. She watched it happen. The restless, destabilized energy she'd observed from the doorway settled into something focused and absolute, the way a searching wolf went still when it found what it had been looking for. The relief that moved through his expression was involuntary and total, and she read it the way she read every compound that crossed her workbench. Genuine, unperformable, biological. He had come because his body had given him no choice. Neve, he said. His voice was rougher than she remembered, less controlled, stripped of the precise cadence he used in political settings. She looked at Brennan. He stood near the door, positioned between them without blocking either path. His expression gave nothing away. His scent gave nothing away. He was holding himself at a professional remove so thorough it must have cost him something, though what it cost would never be visible in this room. "I need to speak with you," Hadion said. Privately. She considered this. Briefly. The compound specialist in her assessed the risk. He was weakened, his wolf was unstable, but he was not dangerous. Not to her. The bond prevented it. and she needed this conversation the way she needed to lance a wound. Leaving infection in place was not an option she respected in compounds or in people. "Here," she said. "This is my workspace. Corwin can wait outside." Brennan looked at her. She met his gaze and held it for one breath. And in that breath, she said everything she could not say aloud. "I am all right. I need to do this. I will be here when it is done." He nodded once and left. The door closed. Hadian stood in the center of her workspace. He was a man built for council chambers and political architecture, and the stone walls of a northern compound room diminished him in ways that had nothing to do with the space and everything to do with what was missing. His authority, which had been the scaffolding of every interaction she'd ever had with him, was visibly compromised. Without the suppressant maintaining the smooth surface, the cracks showed. She waited. She was good at waiting. She had been waiting for 8 months for something honest from this man, and the irony was not lost on her that the honesty was only arriving because the chemistry that had been suppressing it was failing. "You were never temporary to me," Hadian said. The words landed in the workspace, and Neve looked at them the way she looked at a contaminated sample. She examined their composition. She tested their integrity. "You said it, Hadian," she replied. Her voice was level. "I was standing 12 feet away in the eastern corridor, and you said it. To Breck and Talon. She's temporary." That is a direct quote. His jaw worked. The muscle in his cheek tightened and released in a pattern she recognized as suppressed distress. He looked at the compound vials arranged on her workbench, and then back at her face. "I was wrong," he said. "Yes. I was under the influence of the suppressant. It altered my judgment, my emotional responses, my ability to recognize what the bond was, actually." Neve held up one hand. He stopped. "You chose to take the suppressant," she said. "You sourced it. You administered it daily. You made the pharmacological decision to dampen your wolf's response to me so that my presence would not interfere with your plans." She let each sentence land separately. "The suppressant did not put those words in your mouth, Hadian. It made it easier for you to say what you already believed." He flinched. It was small, controlled even now, but she saw it. "The political pressure," he began. "My father's expectations. The Vander Alliance was the strategic path forward, and I could not. I could not afford to be compromised by a bond I didn't choose. You were a compound specialist, packless, no political standing. If I acknowledged you publicly, everything I had built would." He stopped. He heard himself. She watched the moment he heard himself, watched it land on his own ears with the particular impact of a man who had run out of corridors to hide in. "I am not here to argue," she said. "I accept that the suppressant altered your behavior. I accept that the political calculations were real. I even accept that you may have believed, in some suppressed and medicated version of yourself, that I was temporary." She picked up a vial from the workbench and set it down again, the motion of a woman whose hands needed occupation. "But you said it, and I heard it, and the compound did not say it for you." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I know." She told him about the sabotage. His face changed. The sharp angles went still as she laid out the evidence. The Vander connection, the degradation agent in Ashenmoor's stores, the shared chemical family between the territorial sabotage compounds and his personal suppressants. 2 operations, 1 supplier. She watched him process it. He was intelligent. She had never denied that. She watched the intelligence work through the implications and arrive at the conclusion she had reached days ago. The political alliance he had sacrificed her for was built on his own exploitation. The Vander network had been supplying his suppressants and using the same supply chain to poison a rival territory. He had been a tool, medicated into compliance and too chemically impaired to see it. "I didn't know," he said. "No," Neve agreed. "But the people you chose over me did." He stood in her workspace, and she watched the architecture of his self-image rearrange. It was not a dramatic collapse. It was the specific, quiet disassembly of a man discovering that the structure he had built his ambitions on was rotten at the foundation. The conversation should have ended there, but Hadian did something she had not expected. He looked at her, directly, without calculation, without the political lens she was accustomed to seeing behind his eyes. His wolf was present in his gaze, gold threading through the dark, and for the first time in their entire acquaintance, he looked at her without any pharmaceutical barrier between his perception and her reality. "I made you smaller," he said quietly. "I made you smaller so that I could fit into a life that was never going to fit me. I am sorry for every day of those 8 months. I am sorry for the compound room and the back entrance, and the way I said your name when I was performing, and the way I never said it when I was not. I am sorry that you heard what you heard in that corridor and that it was true. It was true when I said it. I believed it. And I was wrong." It named the harm without deflecting it. It acknowledged the truth of his words without excusing them. It was proportionate to the damage, which was considerable, and it did not ask for anything in return. She accepted it. She accepted the apology, the way she accepted a compound analysis that confirmed what she already knew. She filed it as data. She let it settle into the record of what had happened between them. She did not take him back. These were different things, and the difference was the entire point. "Thank you," she said. "For saying that honestly." He nodded. His wolf's gold faded from his eyes. Slowly, reluctantly, he looked at the workspace, at the vials arranged by reactivity, at the evidence of a life she had built in a territory that was not his. He left. Neve stood alone in the compound workspace and breathed. The bond still pulled. His scent still lingered in the room, stronger now without the suppressant's flattening, and her wolf turned toward it with the relentless fidelity of a compass needle. She let it pull. She did not follow. She walked outside into the late afternoon cold. Brennan was leaning against the wall of the forge, arms folded, looking at the mountains, not waiting for her, simply present, in the same space, at the same time, in the way he had been present for 10 weeks without ever requiring anything from her in exchange. She stood beside him. Neither of them spoke. The mountains were very blue against the autumn sky, and the smoke from the settlement's chimneys rose straight in the still air. After a while, she went back to work. She threw herself into the documentation with an intensity that Petra later described as concerning, and Corwin described as effective. The compound trail was complete. Every sample analyzed, every supply chain link documented, every chemical signature cataloged and cross-referenced with Ashenmoor's territorial records. The evidence was irrefutable in the way that only chemistry could be. Compounds did not lie. They did not omit. They did not restructure their narrative to suit a political agenda. They simply were what they were. And what these were was proof. She prepared the summit presentation with a thoroughness she applied to everything. Brennan reviewed it. He asked 3 questions, all of which demonstrated that he had read every page. Corwin asked 2 more, both of which demonstrated that he trusted the evidence but wanted to understand the methodology well enough to defend it. No one asked her if she was sure. Hadion remained in Ashenmoor, while the summit preparations continued. He slept in the guest quarters at the far edge of the settlement, and she felt his presence through the bond like a low-frequency sound she could not quite locate. His wolf's proximity had a stabilizing effect on his deterioration, which was medically predictable and emotionally intolerable. He was getting better because she was near him, and the biology did not care that she had not consented to being his cure. He came to her cottage on the 5th evening, not to plead. She opened the door and found him standing in the cold with his hands at his sides and his expression stripped of everything except the thing he had come to say. "I want you to know," he said, "that what Brennan sees in you is real. I saw it too. I just decided it was less important than what I wanted for myself." He paused. "That was the worst thing I have ever done." He did not wait for a response. He turned and walked back toward the guest quarters, and his wolf's howl inside his chest was silent to everyone except Neve, who felt it through the bond like a fist closing around nothing. She stood in the doorway and watched him go. The bond pulled. It would always pull. She was beginning to understand that this was not a wound that healed, but a condition she would carry, the way some people carried old fractures that ached in cold weather. It was simply part of her now. It did not get to decide. She closed the door. She did not pack. The territorial summit convened at the neutral hall 3 days later. The space was vast and formal, built in an era when wolf politics required architecture that could contain the combined alpha presence of 4 territorial leaders without the walls cracking. Banners from every territory hung in the vaulted ceiling. King Aldrich's crest dominated the eastern wall. The delegations arranged themselves by rank and territory, and the scent landscape was so dense with political anxiety and suppressed aggression that Neve's nose worked overtime cataloging threats before she'd crossed the threshold. She entered as Ashenmoor's compound specialist. Brennan had introduced her to the assembled delegations by title and territory, publicly, with his alpha voice carrying the introduction across the hall in a way that was technically formal and practically a declaration. This woman belongs to my territory, and her authority is my authority, and you will address her accordingly. People who had known her at the king's court turned to look. She felt their attention like a change in air pressure. The quiet compound worker from Hadion Voss's back rooms was standing in the main hall of the territorial summit in a position of visible authority, and the cognitive adjustment required of the assembled wolves was audible in their silence. Marin had arrived with the court delegation. She caught Neve's eye across the hall, and her expression was fierce and proud and slightly wet around the edges, which she would deny categorically if questioned. The summit proceeded through its morning sessions. Territorial disputes, trade negotiations, the routine friction of 4 powers sharing borders and resources. Neve sat in the Ashenmoor delegation and read the room the way she read compounds. Layered, precise, attentive to what was beneath the surface rather than on top of it. Hadion was seated with the king's command staff. His deterioration was visible to anyone with functional scent perception, and in a room full of wolves, that was everyone. His control was fragmenting in real time. His scent cycled between suppressed neutrality and something rawer, something that made the wolves nearest him shift uncomfortably in their seats. His eyes caught gold 3 times during the morning session, brief and involuntary, the wolf pushing through at moments of stress. King Aldrich noticed. The Alpha King's attention settled on his Beta commander, with the steady assessment of a man who missed nothing and revealed less. He noticed, and he filed it. And the summit continued. The collapse happened mid-afternoon. Hadion was responding to a question about the northern trade route agreements when his sentence broke. Not ended, broke. The word he was speaking simply stopped being produced by his mouth, and his hand gripped the armrest of his chair with a force that whitened his knuckles. His eyes went wolf gold, fully, both irises flooding with amber light that had nothing to do with reflected candlelight and everything to do with a wolf that was no longer accepting its human host's authority. He controlled it. Barely. The gold receded by force of will that Neve could see cost him physically. His jaw clenched. His breathing regulated through effort. He did not stand. He did not lose his seat. But every wolf in the hall had seen it. Neve's compound analysis had already told her what was happening. The bond suppression compound he had been taking for 8 months had a cumulative effect on the wolf-human equilibrium. Extended use, combined with the stress of a denied fated bond, produced a specific deterioration pattern. The suppressant had been holding the wolf back like a dam, and now that the compound was clearing from his system, the dam was giving way. Not all at once. In surges. Each one harder to contain than the last. He needed treatment. Specific, knowledgeable, compound-aware treatment from someone who understood the exact interaction between the suppressant's chemical structure and his bond physiology. There was one person in the hall who had that expertise. Brennan looked at her. He did not ask, did not pressure, did not suggest. He simply looked at her, and in his look was the absolute, infuriating, necessary trust that she would make her own decision and he would respect it regardless. She stood. The hall's attention shifted to her as she crossed the floor. She was aware of every eye. She was aware of King Aldrich's gaze tracking her movement. She was aware of Marin standing near the court delegation with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She was aware of Sylvie Vander, seated with her family's delegation, watching with the still expression of a woman who was beginning to understand that the arrangement she'd been promised had never been as solid as she'd been told. Neve reached Hadion's chair. Up close, the damage was worse. His skin had the translucent quality she associated with compounds metabolizing too fast. His pulse was visible at his throat. rapid and irregular. She crouched beside him and spoke quietly enough that the words were for him alone, though she knew the wolves in the nearest seats would catch them. I need you to tell me exactly what you've been taking. Compound name, dosage, duration. His eyes found her face. The gold was still there, flickering at the edges of his irises. She saw the moment his pride tried to assert itself, and the moment his body overrode it. Verithin, he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. Pharmaceutical grade, 40 milligrams daily. 8 months. Her stomach dropped. Verithin at that dosage for that duration was not a maintenance protocol. It was a chemical siege on the wolf-human bond. The fact that he was still conscious and verbal was a testament to his baseline constitution and nothing else. She stood and addressed King Aldrich directly. Your Majesty, Commander Voss is experiencing compound-induced bond destabilization from long-term suppressant use. I can identify the specific interaction and administer a counteragent, but I need access to the summit's medical stores, and I need it now. The Alpha King looked at her for a long moment. His authority filled the hall, the way sunlight filled a cathedral, from above and without apology. You are the Ashenmoor compound specialist, he said. I am. Then you have what you need. He turned to his guard captain. Clear the medical wing. Give her everything she asks for. The guard moved. Neve moved. 2 of the king's healers followed her, and between the 3 of them, they carried Hadion to the medical wing while his wolf surged and retreated and surged again behind his eyes. She worked for 4 hours. She identified the specific Verithin metabolites still active in his system. She formulated a counteragent calibrated to his weight, his constitution, and the particular way the suppressant had integrated with his bond chemistry. She administered it in 3-stage doses, monitoring his scent signature between each one for the telltale shift that would indicate the compound was clearing rather than converting. The healers watched her work with the specific silence of professionals recognizing expertise that exceeded their own. Hadion lay on the medical cot and looked at her with wolf gold eyes that faded, degree by degree, back to their natural dark. His breathing steadied. His pulse regulated. The scent of the suppressant, which had been a constant layer in his signature for every day she had known him, thinned, and was gone. What was left was him. Just him. No pharmaceutical architecture. No controlled surface. A man lying on a cot in a medical wing, looking at the woman who had just saved his life with the same competence he had once filed under useful but temporary. Thank you, he said. She cleaned her hands, put away the compounds, made notes in the medical record with the same precision she applied to everything. You're stable, she said. The counteragent will continue working for the next 12 hours. You'll need monitoring, but the crisis has passed. She looked at him one more time. His wolf was quiet now, truly quiet, not suppressed into silence, but resting with the exhausted calm of an animal that had been fighting for months and had finally been allowed to stop. She left the medical wing. The hall outside was empty, except for Corwin, who was leaning against the wall with his arms folded and his expression carefully blank. He's stable, Neve told him. Corwin nodded. He pushed off the wall. Brennan's in the main hall. The summit is reconvening. She walked back into the summit hall. Every delegation was seated. Every face turned toward her. She had just treated the Alpha King's beta commander in front of the entire political assembly, and the room's assessment of her had undergone a permanent revision. She took her seat in the Ashenmoor delegation. Brennan's hand moved beneath the table. His fingers brushed the outside of her wrist once, brief and specific, and then returned to his own space. She breathed. The summit reconvened the following morning with Neve standing before the full assembly. King Aldrich had granted Ashenmoor's request to present evidence of supply chain interference, and the hall was arranged in formal session. Every delegation present. Every territorial alpha in attendance. The banners hung motionless in the still air. She spoke clearly, technically, without embellishment or emotion. She presented the compound analysis the way she presented every analysis, with the evidence first and the conclusions following, inevitably from it. The degradation agent identified in Ashenmoor's stores, the chemical signature linking it to a specific supplier network, the timeline demonstrating 7 months of coordinated contamination. The supply chain documentation connecting the Vander trading network to both the territorial sabotage and the personal bond suppression compounds supplied to Commander Hadion Voss. She did not raise her voice. She did not editorialize. She let the chemistry speak. And chemistry spoke with the authority of something that could not be argued with, only understood. The Vander delegation's composure deteriorated in stages. The Patriarch's scent shifted from confident to controlled to something approaching panic, as each piece of evidence built on the last. His guards exchanged glances. His advisors went still. Sylvie Vander sat in the third row of her family's delegation. Her expression did not crack. It simply went very, very still. And Neve, who read people the way she read compounds, identified the specific quality of that stillness. Not guilt. Sylvie had not known. It was the stillness of a woman watching the structure she had trusted her future to reveal itself as hollow. A woman discovering that the marriage she'd been promised was not a partnership but a chess move, and that her own family had been the ones moving the pieces. She was not a villain. She was a casualty. And the distinction mattered, even if no one in the hall was looking at her closely enough to see it. King Aldrich's ruling was decisive. The Vander territories forfeited their summit concessions. The trade agreements built on the contaminated supply chain were dissolved. The Patriarch was taken into custody for formal investigation. Hadion sat in the hall throughout. He was stable, color returning to his face, the counteragent doing its work. He watched Neve command the room. His wolf was completely still, not the restless stillness of a searching wolf or the medicated stillness of a suppressed one. The absolute, devastated stillness of recognition, arriving in full, without barrier, in front of everyone. She was not temporary. She was the most permanent thing he had ever encountered, and he had filed her under disposable because she did not fit the shape of the ambition that had now collapsed around him. He did not speak. He did not object. He sat as witness to her competence, and let the weight of it settle on him like something he would carry for a very long time. After the session, Marin caught Neve in the corridor. The healer's eyes were bright. She did not speak. She put her hands on Neve's shoulders and squeezed once, hard, and the fierce pride in the gesture said everything her voice could not. "About time," Marin said. Neve almost smiled. Later, after the hall had emptied and the delegations had dispersed to their quarters and the summit's political landscape had been permanently redrawn, Hadion found her in the corridor outside the medical wing. He did not ask her to come back. He said, "I want you to know that what Brennan sees in you is real." She stared at him. He had said this before. In Ashenmoor, outside her cottage, in the cold. "I know I said it already," he said. "I am saying it again here because this is where it matters. In front of these walls and these people and this place where I kept you in a back room and called you temporary." His voice was steady, not controlled. Steady. The difference was everything. "I saw it too, Neve. Your competence. Your precision. The way you read a room before anyone in it has finished lying. I saw all of it and I decided it was less important than what I wanted for myself." He paused. "I don't deserve anything from you. I know that. I'm saying this because you deserve to hear it, not because I expect it to change anything." She looked at him. This sharp-featured, pale, angular man who had held her at arm's length for 8 months with chemistry and calculation and the word temporary, who had reduced his fated bond to a line item on a political ledger, who was standing in front of her now, stripped of every compound and every pretense, and telling her the truth without asking for anything in return. She nodded. He turned and walked back down the corridor. She did not watch him go. She did not need to. The bond told her exactly how far he traveled, exactly when he turned the corner, exactly when the distance between them crossed the threshold where the pull became its own kind of silence. She stood in the corridor for a long time. Then she went back to her quarters and sat in the chair by the window and looked at the summit grounds and felt 2 things at once. The bond in her chest, constant, pulling south toward a man she was not going to follow, and something else, something quieter and harder to name, that pulled north, toward a stone cottage at the edge of a settlement in the mountains, toward a garden she had planted. toward a man who had never once used the word temporary because the concept did not exist in his vocabulary when it came to her. Brennan came to her door that night. He did not enter. He stood in the corridor with his hands at his sides and his expression open in a way she had never seen from him. The composed alpha restraint set down like a weight he had been carrying for weeks and was now, carefully, placing on the ground. "I would like to claim you tomorrow," he said. "At the ceremony, I am asking, not telling. If you say no, I will walk back down this corridor and nothing between us changes. You will still have the cottage and the position and every door I can open for you. This is not conditional." The words were simple. They were the most important words anyone had ever said to her, and they were simple. She stood in her doorway and felt the weight of them and understood that their simplicity was itself the point. He was not performing. He was not negotiating. He was standing in a corridor and telling her the truth, and giving her the space to refuse it. "Why me?" she asked. A packless compound specialist with a fated bond to another man still pulling at her chest. "Because you read every compound in my stores and reorganize them by reactivity in your first week," he said. "And when I asked why, you said because the old system would have killed someone. Because you argued with Corwin about perimeter security, and you were right, and you didn't back down. Because you have been temporary to one man and it made you believe you are temporary to the world, and you are not. You are the least temporary person I have ever met." She was not going to cry. She had not cried when she heard the word in the corridor. She had not cried when she packed her 2 cases. She had not cried in 6 weeks of compound analysis and sabotage investigation and the slow, painful education of learning to trust a man who did not use trust as currency. Her eyes filled anyway. "I still feel him," she said. "The bond. It's still there. It may never fully fade." "I know," Brennan said. "I have known since the balcony. Your scent still carries him." He held her gaze. "I am not asking you to stop feeling it. I am asking you to choose me anyway." She looked at him. This man who had carried his wanting like a private thing, who had given her work and space and the specific, devastating kindness of never once requiring her to earn what he offered, who had let her choose, every time, at every threshold, including this one. "Yes," she said. His breath left him. A single exhale, controlled and uneven, the sound of a man who had prepared himself for the answer he wanted and was still shaken by receiving it. He reached up. His hand hovered beside her face without touching it. She closed the distance. She took his hand and pressed it against her jaw. His palm was warm and rough and large enough that his fingers curved past her ear into her hair. She felt the calluses on his skin and the steadiness beneath them and the slight tremor that said his control was holding but only just. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers. He did not kiss her. He stood there with his forehead touching hers and breathed. And through the contact, she felt the specific quality of his restraint, finally, carefully, beginning to loosen. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "Tomorrow," she agreed. He left. She stood in the doorway and pressed her hand to the place on her jaw where his palm had been, and felt the warmth of it persist long after his footsteps had faded. The ceremony hall was arranged for witnessed claiming. King Aldrich presided from the raised seat at the eastern wall, his authority filling the space with the settled weight of law itself. Every delegation was present. The banners hung motionless. The scent landscape was thick with anticipation, and the particular charged quality of wolves gathered to witness a bond. Neve entered from the western door. She wore the dark dress she'd worn to the reception months ago, the one designed not to be seen. She had not changed it. She had not dressed for spectacle. She was what she was, a compound specialist, competent, present, walking into a hall full of people who had known her as the quiet woman in Hadion Voss's shadow, and who were now watching her walk toward the rival alpha of Ashenmore with the steady, unhurried gait of someone who had stopped being afraid of being seen. Marin was in the crowd. Her eyes were bright and fierce, and she was holding Petra's arm with a grip that was definitely going to leave a bruise. Petra had traveled for this. She stood in the hall in her practical herbalist's clothing, completely unmoved by the political grandeur surrounding her, and watched Neve with the settled pride of someone who had known, from the first cup of ginger tea, that this was where the story was going. Corwin stood at Brennan's shoulder. His expression was neutral. His scent was not. It carried the specific warmth of loyalty confirmed, of a judgment validated. Sylvie Vander was in the crowd. She had stayed for the summit's conclusion despite her family's disgrace. She stood alone, without delegation, without the alliance she had been promised, and she watched the ceremony with an expression that Neve could not read and did not try to. Whatever Sylvie was carrying belonged to Sylvie. Hadian was present. He stood at the edge of the hall. He was stable, the counteragent working, his wolf quiet. His dark eyes followed Neve as she walked the length of the hall, and his expression was something she had never seen on him. Not calculation, not performance, not the sharp, angular control that had defined every interaction between them. Grief. Recognition. The particular devastation of a man watching something precious be given to someone else and understanding, with absolute clarity, that this was the correct outcome. He did not object. He did not disrupt. He stood as witness, which was the hardest thing he had ever done and the first purely selfless thing he had done for her. Brennan stood at the ceremony's center. His dark brown hair was loose for the first time she had seen, falling around his face. And his calm, intense expression held the quality of a man who had been still for a very long time and was now finally permitted to move. He spoke. His alpha voice carried the words across the hall with a resonance that settled into the stone floor and the wooden beams and the bones of every wolf present. I claim Neve Ashford as my mate, my equal, my permanent and chosen partner. She is not borrowed. She is not conditional. She is not temporary. She is mine, and I am hers, and this is witnessed. The word landed in the hall like a door being closed and locked, and the key thrown into deep water. Temporary. He had taken the word that had defined her wound, and he had answered it. Publicly. Permanently. In front of every person who had known her as the compound girl, the backroom specialist, the woman a man had called disposable in a corridor and meant it. She felt the word land. She felt it land in the chests of the assembled wolves who understood what was being answered. She felt it land in Marin, whose sharp intake of breath was audible 3 rows back. She felt it land in Hadian, who closed his eyes. Neve spoke her claim. Her voice was clear and carried, and she did not rush. I claim Brennan Thane as my mate, my equal, my chosen, not by bond, not by biology, by choice. Because he offered me every door and never once stood in front of one. I claim him freely, and I do so before these witnesses, and I ask that it be recorded as what it is. Mine. The silence in the hall was absolute. She stepped forward. He stepped forward. The distance between them closed to nothing, and she could smell him fully, the warm earth and pine and leather and the deep, honest note beneath everything that she had been reading for weeks without letting herself name it. Home. He smelled like home. She tilted her chin up. He lowered his head. His mouth found the junction of her neck and shoulder, and his teeth pressed against the skin with the deliberate, careful pressure of a man who understood that what he was doing was permanent and wanted it to be. The bite was sharp and clean, and the chosen bond settled into place between them like a key turning in a lock. Not the searing, involuntary cascade of a fated bond. Something different. Something warmer and steadier. Built deliberately, the way she built a compound formulation, precise and intentional and designed to last. She felt him through it, not the overwhelming flood of a biological imperative, but a clear, specific awareness. His steady pulse, his contained joy, his absolute, unshakable certainty that this was correct. She pulled back. She looked at him. Then she pressed her mouth to his throat, where the pulse beat strong and fast, and she bit, claiming him back. The wolf's gesture of equals meeting, neither above the other, both choosing. He made a sound. Low. Not a growl. Something more private, felt through the bond rather than heard. And his arms came around her and held her against him with the strength and gentleness of a man who had spent 10 weeks not touching her and was now, finally, allowed. Marin was crying. She would deny it until her last breath, but Neve could smell the salt from 3 rows away. Corwin nodded once. The hall erupted. Hadian turned and walked out of the hall. He did not look back. He did not need to. The bond between him and Neve was still there, would always be there. A pull that would ache in cold weather and settle in warm. But it was not the thing that defined her anymore. It was simply a thing she carried, the way old scars carried the memory of the wound without reopening. His wolf made one sound as he crossed the threshold, a single, long, quiet note that was not a howl and not a whine, but something between them. An acknowledgement, a release. Then the door closed behind him, and Neve stood in the hall with Brennan's arms around her, and the chosen bond warm at her shoulder, and the word temporary buried beneath the weight of everything that had just been witnessed. The garden had come in. Neve stood in the doorway of the stone cottage and looked at the rows of medicinal herbs she had planted in her 3rd week at Ashenmoor. Feverfew and yarrow and the particular strain of boneset that only grew well in northern soil. She had put the seeds in the ground when she still had her bags packed and her boots by the door, and the contradiction of this had not occurred to her at the time. She had simply seen empty soil and known what to do with it. The plants did not care about her emotional state. They had grown anyway. Brennan sat on the bench beside the cottage door with the territory report in one hand and his other hand resting on her knee. His thumb traced a slow circle on her kneecap. Absent, habitual, the gesture of a man who touched her because proximity was a language he spoke without thinking and fluently. He was reading the report with the focused attention he gave everything, which was considerable, and touching her with the unconscious ease he gave only her, which was more. The bond mark at her shoulder was warm, not the searing heat she had felt once, briefly, when proximity to Hadion had forced the faded bond to the surface. This was different. The steady warmth of a fire that was built deliberately, log, by someone who understood that lasting warmth required patience and intention and the willingness to tend it. She sorted dried compounds on the table between them. Ashenmoor's stores were clean now, rebuilt from the ground up with supply chains she had verified personally. The work was ongoing, as all compound work was ongoing, and she found this continuity reassuring rather than tedious. She liked that the work never ended. It meant there was always something to do with her hands and her nose and the particular precision that had always been her truest self. Corwin appeared in the doorway with a Border Patrol report. Brennan took it without removing his hand from her knee. Corwin's gaze moved from the report to Neve to the sorted compounds and back, and the corner of his mouth shifted by approximately 1 millimeter, which for Corwin constituted an expression of complete approval. Neve continued sorting. The autumn light came through the garden at an angle that turned the yarrow gold and the bone-set silver and made the stone walls of the cottage look like something that had been there for centuries and would be there for centuries. More. She had not packed a bag in 4 months.